Welcome back, everybody, to Flat Irons Tuning. We got the whole shop here to have a shop talk about the elephant in the room that isn't in the room, the GR Corolla and the 2022 WRX. What sparked this conversation was there's an article from Motor Trend where they compared the two, the new WRX, the 2022 WRX, and the GR Corolla, and a lot of interesting points, and we felt like it was definitely deserving of a conversation, especially after we now have put a 2022 WRX on the dyno, and we now know what the potential is of that car, or at least we have a glimpse into the potential of that car. Because, I think most of you watching this would assume, probably rightly so, that the GR Corolla would be the hands-down winner in a competition between those two. But now knowing how much power the WRX can make fairly easily, maybe it's not going to be as much of a landslide victory for the GR Corolla, and maybe there's some other factors to consider as well. So, I don't know, throw it out to the guys here. First, what is the first thing you guys think of when we think about, the new WRX versus the GR Corolla?
Well, I think there's more headroom in the WRX.
Absolutely.
I think that Corolla is probably pretty high strung. And is probably at its maximum, if not 95% of its maximum. Where seeing what Harvey could do with the WRX on the dyno, it looks like there's a lot of potential in it, and there's more tuning room than there might be on the Corolla.
Absolutely. I like it as like a starting point.
Mm-hmm.
Because most of us that are in it for the potential of like, yeah, it's good as it is, but what can we make it?
Right.
And I want to echo what Mike said. Like that GR Corolla might be at like 8/10 of everything it can do, whereas the WRX we know for certain we can do better with.
I'll tell you, I'm gonna put down a bet that I have a guess that the GR Corolla is going to be underrated. I have a bet that when people start putting the GR Corolla on the dynos, I bet you that it's going to dyno close to the 300 horsepower that it is supposedly making at the flywheel.
Mm-hmm.
I could be off on that, which would kind of put it as a starting point out ahead of the WRX. But that's, to your point, Mike, that's one of the criteria now that this is, like, the game has changed in the sport compact world.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot look at a platform and as easily think of just all of the stuff that you can do to it to dramatically increase the power output of the car. Now you have to kind of realize that the degree to which you're going to be able to increase the output is going to be less now with all the new requirements on these cars, just because of the stuff that, it's either going to be less available, or you just, in your area, you're just not going to be able to, like, bolt on an exhaust and that sort of thing. So, that, like, having that headroom in the new WRX just is a bone stock car, that kind of might level the playing field. We'll just have to see.
And specifically 3-cylinder versus 4-cylinder, making 300 horsepower in both. The WRX makes a little bit more than that, but that's 100 horsepower per cylinder, which is probably within an inch of its life, or a few inches of its life. That's a really high strung engine.
I think it can I think the Toyota will be able to do it. The GR Yaris has proved to be reliable, though it started out making a little bit less horsepower. But it is smaller displacement, and it's only the 3-cylinder. So, the headroom, it's going to be different than on the WRX.
I've seen people take the Yaris up to 500 horsepower.
Yeah.
No way, really?
So
that is
ridiculous.
There's that headroom.
And the engine seems to be torque limited. You can only go up to a certain torque, and then if you can just maintain that torque, then that's, in the higher RPM range, which, being a smaller displacement 3-cylinder engine, it's happy to play in the higher RPM range.
Yeah.
For sure.
But that's one of the other differences. That's one of the new things that Subaru's exploiting with this WRX, with the FA24, is it's got low end. So if you want to have a really rich mid-range power band to use, I think the WRX fits that bill more than the GR Corolla might.
And obviously we're waiting to see what can be done with the new WRX, but being able to maintain that low end power and then find a way to hold it out further in the RPM range would make it a more interesting and fun car to drive, in my opinion, because I like RPMs. Which is the same thing with the Yaris. Is I like RPMs. I like driving cars hard. So when widen that power band out to have fun with it, I think that's still way more headroom with the WRX.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How much of a deciding factor, like if you're looking at these two cars, are the drivetrain advantages that the GR Corolla has? Like the fact that it's got all these active differentials, whereas the WRX does not.
For me, that's not like the end of the world. I mean, it'd be a riot on track if I was going to track days all the time, doing those things like canyon carving. But I mean, for the most part, I want it to drive well.
Sure.
And if, whether or not it has fancy diffs is not going to change my, I should buy this one over that one. So that would not be a thing for me. As long as both cars were to perform, like, especially, with snow and ice on the ground right now, maybe then it'd be more of a factor. But either one of these, I don't think wouldn't sway me if that was like, okay, Mike, you have to choose. But the only thing you can pivot it on is the differentials. I can't.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I personally would base my decision on the transmission.
Yeah.
100%. Because that's going to be a limiting factor for the WRX, as we know.
Right.
I don't know if it's going to be a limiting factor for the GR.
Right.
We don't know the capabilities of that.
If nothing else, we know that adding diffs to a car is not cheap. Rear diff is the easiest one. The front diff is expensive because you have to go into the transmission.
Mm-hmm.
And this is not the STI 6-speed. It is basically the split case 6-speed that the WRX has had since 2015.
Is that what they call a 5.5 speed?
The 5.5 speed.
Okay, yeah.
Exactly. So, it's just, it doesn't have the power potential. And with the amount of torque that this engine can make, like you can probably tune this car up to the point where now the transmission is a liability. In fact, I would argue what we saw just with a 100% stock car with some ethanol in the fuel tank, like that transmission is going to be a liability.
It's going to get sent.
Just because
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, if the Yaris has got a drivetrain that's a lot more stout, if you are going to be doing a lot more track time, and if you are going to be pushing the car harder, having that more reliable drivetrain, that tips the scales.
I've driven GTIs, I've driven Focus RSs, and I've driven STIs. STIs are by far the most raw out of this set of turbo all-wheel drive four bangers.
Yeah.
In my opinion, STIs are definitely the most raw and kind of old school mechanical cars.
Yeah. Right.
Then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got GTIs and Golf Rs that are absolutely sticky and total weapons, but they have no soul. It feels like I'm driving a computer. I don't have fun while I'm doing it.
More disconnected.
So that's kind of points towards WRX, in my opinion, where you got less technology. It's more dependent on the driver as opposed to the car, which once again, I like that. Not everybody's the same, but I think the Corolla is going to have a lot of potential and be somewhere on that slider in between both of those ends of the spectrum and be a really, really fun car to drive.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think there was a huge missed opportunity for a Morizo edition competitor with that 2.5 RS release. If Subaru had put out a 2.5 RS with a 6-speed and the F8 or FE24 that's in the new WRX, that would have been
amazing.
A GR Corolla killer.
Absolutely.
Right there.
Yeah.
6-speed STI transmission.
Well, that would have been the STI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's
would have been the reboot of the STI hatchback, which we would all love.
Bring back the hatch. Back in life.
But I think you could do that yourself. I mean, we've talked here, the difference between what a GR Corolla is going to sell for being limited edition and the 22 WRX being sort of a just go buy one whenever you want. For the price differential, you might be able to take a 22 WRX, put a 6-speed transmission into it, beef it up, and still be under the cost of what a GR Corolla would be with a dealer.
What are the price points?
So the GR Corolla is supposed to start, I think it's around $35,000. So it's actually in the ballpark.
Base GR Corolla.
The base. But in the WRX starts around in the same ballpark. The track edition, I think, is $42,000, which is the one that comes with all of the diffs and it's got the forged carbon fiber roof. The diffs, another key point is they're torque biasing diffs, if I read that right. They're not clutch type diffs. And so for all out ultimate performance, sticky tires, power, whatever, you might run into some of the same issues that SCIs do, where you're going to need to put in a plated diff anyway.
Yeah.
Which I think Cusco makes, and there's some companies that make, but there again, like that's an expense to go in there. But that's on the face value. But yeah, I mean, what it seems to me like these limited edition sport compact cars that companies are making, but now they're making them in very small numbers, which is leading to dealer markups.
Yeah.
That to me is like largely that in and of itself could largely kill off a lot of the sport compact enthusiasts out there, because like at this price point, the GR Corolla is an amazing value, right?
At MSRP, yes.
At MSRP.
Right.
Yeah, you get the core for 36 grand, and you actually pay that much. You know,
That's going to be an amazing car for 36K.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're having to pay 10 or even 20,000, maybe even more than that on top of that price, like, is that a $55,000 car?
Absolutely not.
It's penalizing a lot of the enthusiasts that don't have the deep pocketbooks,
Right.
necessarily. But by the same token, the WRX not being a limited edition car, being more available, something where like, okay, yeah, you got to wait 3 or 4 months, maybe not, but you can just go down and buy one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a nice thing. And having driven it, like Viet, you and I both drove the new WRX on track. It is a fun car.
Absolutely.
In fact, when we were talking coming back from being out at Miller, or not Utah Motorsports Campus,
Same.
that same. But that was what we were surprised by. We did not expect to like the new WRX as much as we did. That was like
Yeah.
That was
we
the
thought
big
it was
surprise.
just going to be really
Significantly different than last generation, or
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, it's
absolutely.
It feels way different. The handling and the responsiveness was what was really surprising.
Yeah.
So what trim level of WRX did you drive? Was it the GT?
No, it
or
was not
No.
the GG.
It was-
manual?
It was
It was
manual.
manual.
Okay.
I think manual limited, maybe.
I think
Okay,
yeah.
the limited.
Because it had the
Yeah.
giant
It
screen.
had the screen and stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it was just it was a lot of fun, and I was not
impressed.
expecting it.
I was impressed at how well it handled. Just stop, boom, stop.
Knowing having that experience, that's the hard thing. Like, haven't been able to. I don't think I've even seen a GR Corolla in person yet, much less been able to drive one. But knowing what the driving experience was with the WRX, and also now seeing what, like, even with just a little tweak of the tune, the potential is with that car. You know, it's going to need some brakes, but man, it's a fun car. I would not mind having it as a daily for sure,
Definitely.
and maybe even an occasional track car.
Absolutely. I think it'd make a great overall, like, just
If you could only own one car, it'd be good at that.
Yeah,
yes.
Mhm.
yeah. I mean,
I can see that.
I do like the hatch of the GR Corolla,
Mhm.
but
Yeah.
the new WRX is big. It has ample trunk space, so it's
On
Yes.
on that token, can we talk about how much better the GR Corolla looks than the WRX? It is.
It is an attractive
prettier.
car.
It is way
it's a
prettier.
cool car.
It does look nice.
They
Yeah.
look so good. Just even
What do you don't like about the video?
plastic cladding everywhere. They look like a Civic and the
Yeah.
rest of
They
Wow.
They do.
Yeah.
they look
Yeah.
like a Civic,
do.
especially from the back. It's
Yeah,
like
for sure.
basically twins.
For me, I think every color I've seen of the Corolla looks really good.
Absolutely.
Whereas the WRX, there are specific color combinations that look good and some that look bad. Like,
Yeah.
for example, the bright orange combination, I am not a fan of
No.
the WRX.
Oh.
No.
But the black and orange, it looks ugly to me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like,
Yeah.
white and black in the WRX and, like, the gray on black looks pretty nice.
Looks better.
But
Absolutely.
every color I've seen of the Corolla is like, I'm like, oh man,
Yeah.
I would love to drive that thing around.
And now we're going down
Yeah.
the path of custom stuff, but you could paint match all the black cladding.
Yep.
That's a
Right.
lot of work and a lot of money, and it would look good. And I've seen it done on a car, and it
Yeah.
does look really good.
I would be amazed if Subaru doesn't come out with that as an accessory.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Or if for the next model year that you have the option of getting body color
Yeah.
surrounds.
Yeah.
So as much as it's easy to say all these things about the WRX, to kind of look at other options, you get behind the wheel of one and it just is it's better than most of us would expect.
And there's two of them at the dealership up the street, not,
Right.
in the ether of the bidding
Right.
cloud for your GR
Right.
Corolla.
Sure.
Right.
That's true. It's tangible. It's attainable right now.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like like you said, John, you could walk in and say, "I want that one," or "No,
Yeah.
wait, you know what? I want that one because I like the orange, so I
Yeah.
want the orange."
And in fact, it also means you can actually go out there and test drive it, and you
Yeah.
can find out and decide for yourself. Versus like these GR Corollas, it's probably going to be like the Civic Type R up the street, where it's going to be in a corner of a showroom, fenced off. Like
Yep.
you can't even
Doesn't
go up
move.
there and get in it, much less probably test drive it even.
And not only can you go get a WRX from the dealership down the street, you can then come see us and pick up an access port.
That
for
is
it.
true.
That's true.
You
In
can.
stock.
That is
There
true.
we go.
Yeah.
They're in stock. On
Off the shelf tunes are out now.
Yeah.
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 It's one of those things where even then, like with the limited production, if the GR Corolla does end up being a limited production car, and there's not very many of them, I mean, there's some of the numbers are crazy low for what potentially is going to come to the U.S. market. How much aftermarket support do you think there's going to be? I mean, there's decent aftermarket support for the GR Yaris,
Mm-hmm.
and it seems like a lot of the RS parts are going to be applicable to the GR Corolla.
Yeah.
But like if they're like, let's say, one number I've heard is that the total worldwide production for the GR Corolla for all of the model years is going to be 8,000 cars, 8,000 units. Like if it's that small, how many aftermarket companies are going to want to build, like, I don't know, like let's say even coilovers. If you know that the maximum number of coilovers you could sell is 8,000 units, and it's probably going to be a fraction of that. It's either going to turn off manufacturers from producing the part, or if they do produce it, it's going to be, maybe even 2 or 3 times the cost of a normal one, because they know that they're going to only sell just a fraction of them.
Mhm.
Absolutely, because there's a lot of R&D, even if it does share some of the parts with the Yaris. Maybe like some of the geometry is going to be different, so there's going to be valving that's going to need to be different, or brake bias might need to be
The
different.
weight is different. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say on the subject of calculations for the chassis and doing that R&D. What's the weight difference between the Corolla and the WRX?
I don't know if we know yet.
Question. Let's see.
I'm gonna guess it's 3,000 pounds for the GR Corolla and 3,400 for the WRX. 3252. It's
32.
heavy.
Core grade
Okay.
GR Corolla.
Yeah. And the new WRX is also supposed to be about 3,200 pounds.
That light, really.
Yeah, they took a lot of weight off.
Yeah.
And it's a big car.
3297.
They're closer than I
Ooh.
thought they were gonna
Yeah.
be. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's a big car, but they got bigger and they saved a lot of weight, which is pretty unusual these days.
Made out of old sardine cans.
It didn't feel big when you were
No.
driving it.
Not at all.
It did
No.
not feel big.
It's the same wheelbase and track width as Imprezas have been for the last 30
No,
years.
it's,
No,
it's wider.
it's
bigger
wider?
and wider.
It's
Yeah.
It's
longer
its
and
own
wider.
chassis now.
It's its own chassis. It's
Really?
It's on a,
That's cool. I
it's
didn't
on-
know that.
It's on the new global chassis for the Impreza.
And thus different subframes and
Everything.
completely redesigned geometry and all that stuff.
Yep.
That's cool.
So, I mean, it sounds like the takeaways are, if the GR Corolla gets marked up, then that's going to be a deciding factor.
Right.
If the GR Corolla is not available, I mean, obviously you can't get one, or if it costs you double the money to get one, I mean, that would be a deciding factor.
Yeah.
I mean, fun factor. Which one do you think would be more fun?
Stock or
So
modified.
they stock right out of the box. I mean, I've been a Subaru guy for a while now, and I really love them. I'd be intrigued about the Toyota, but I think I'd pick the WRX.
I think the Corolla would be a more fun car to drive right out of the box.
Mhm.
I
I
mean,
agree.
from everything,
Yeah,
it sounds like.
Yep.
But I suspect that the WRX is not going to be that far behind. I think that they would both, especially if you're just driving on the street and you're not driving at the track. I think they're both going to be, enjoyable to drive. But I think the Corolla would have the edge with all the fancy drivetrain and the diffs and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely more fun out of the box.
What if the deciding factor is you're looking for a car that you want to daily for, like, say 3 or 4 years, but then you want to turn into a track weapon? Which would that put
WRX.
back into the Corollas?
Yeah, I
WRX wins
still
out
would
for
stay in
me.
the Subaru, in the Subaru land there.
Okay, if availability and money was no object in this
Right,
question,
right.
then definitely the Morizo edition. Well,
Okay.
actually, no, probably the one step below Morizo, the Circuit edition,
Circuit edition?
Corolla.
Okay.
Because then you have all of the features that the Morizo has, but you still have back seats and
Right.
rear window regulators.
That you can take out when you want to instead of never get them in the first place.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, obviously that Circuit edition is probably not going to be available to the average person, whereas a spec'd out 6-speed WRX
Well,
is probably going to be.
I think you have a fighting chance at the Circuit edition, but the Morizo edition, I think they're saying $200 to the U.S. market.
Ooh.
That's going to be a hard one to come by,
Yeah.
or expensive. One or the other.
Now, if I was building a car to be fast on the track and go in shows, Corolla every single day.
Okay.
Yeah, Corolla
Okay.
wins that.
Sure.
It's a better looking car, and I would enjoy it more. I would enjoy owning it more than a WRX because how cars look is really important to me.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I guess it seems like building a car for the track, the Corolla would be the hands down winner. But there are starting to be people that are building the new WRX to go out and run in time attack or run in track days. There are now AP Racing brake kits available for the new WRX. Like I want to say the Essex came out with one. I think it's the 355 millimeter front brake kit and something to match in the rear. So brakes are going to be an option. Drivetrain, I mean, you'd have to assume that it's going to be possible to swap a 6-speed into it, an STI 6-speed.
Let's try it.
We'll have to find out.
If that's possible, I would do the WRX, but I don't know.
Well, if there's a $20,000 gap between the WRX and what you end up having to pay to get into a Corolla, for $20,000 on top of the purchase price of the WRX.
If money wasn't a thing, like I would probably go with the GR for a track car.
Sure, sure.
Makes sense.
Purposes, right?
Yeah.
But we don't know, man. Not knowing that the 6-speed could swap in to the
True.
I mean, the other thing we
WRX.
don't know is how reliable is the drivetrain of the Corolla. I mean,
Right.
personally, I have no insight on that. I have not heard.
You would
anything
imagine it's
about
kind of
a
the same
500
as,
horsepower all
like the Yaris.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
I think it's the same, right? It's supposed.
it's supposed to be the same as the Yaris, yeah. And the Yaris had, watching some of the best motoring videos where they were doing Tsukuba attacks with the Yaris, the interesting thing was if you overheat the transmission, it would basically go into front-wheel drive mode. So when they were trying to do their Tsukuba time attack, they could get, I think they said 2 or 3 corners of all-wheel drive, and then it would default to front-wheel drive. But they're working on fixing that, going with an aftermarket center diff controller. But
What about a transmission cooler? Yeah, I mean, obviously.
well,
depends on
it's
if
the
there's
rear
ports
diff.
that it's the rear
because
diff,
because
not
the center
transmission.
diff, the center coupler isn't part of the rear differential. It's very trick, but then sometimes if you start pushing the threshold, you put sticky tires on it, you make more power. As we've seen with other cars, sometimes then you have some other electronic gremlins that you have to deal with. So
Right, you
who
just
knows?
end up finding the different things that make the little quirks and foibles that you're like, oh, well, I wish I would have known it did this. But hindsight's 20/20 on that. But
well, and that's that's the STI 6-speed is a known quantity. The STI drivetrain is a known quantity. So if there's a way to get that into the 2022 WRX, there's a lot of options, a lot of knowledge out there, a lot of known solutions that would be an option.
man, that'd be cool.
Yeah.
That with the big brakes would be just
Pretty
to me.
ridiculous.
Like,
And I would bet you, because the last WRX, the 2021 WRX, you had it, I think it was a track edition option where you got Brembos front and rear, like the same size as the old STI Brembos.
mhm.
If they come out with an option like that for the new WRX, say in 23 or 24, so you could start with even 325 millimeter front Brembos and matching rears. I mean that's going to be a fun car.
That'd be a riot, absolute riot. I mean, I'm sure it brakes well and it does other things well, but
The brakes are lacking.
they are
The
lacking.
new
Well,
WRX
'cause,
brakes are lacking.
I mean, I've heard that they're about that big.
I think they actually went smaller than the 21.
Mm-hmm.
What else? Is there anything else you guys can think of that would be a critical deciding factor for you if you're looking at both of these cars?
I think so.
Am I transporting, like, the Corolla is definitely a better family car. You got the rear end space to either put a dog back there or kids gear or whatever. Where, granted, the WRX trunk is still sizable,
but it is not a wagon.
But it's not a
wagon.
It's true.
hatchback by any means.
Wagons rule.
Wagons do
there's
rule.
that.
Well, there is a WRX wagon in Australia.
Yes,
Mhm.
You
yes.
can only bring it here, but it only has a CVT.
We'll
So.
call
Ooh.
it mini car mods. Get them to bring
Yeah.
us on board.
I don't know.
Yeah.
If I, like having, taking the seat in and out of like my wife's car and putting it into my car,
Mhm.
for my son, I feel like it looks like there's more space here because the WRX is probably longer.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be easier to get it into that than into the hatch, because even putting it into the Forester is a little bit more work than it is to put it
Yeah.
into my other car.
Well, and actually, to that point, like the newer WRXs, they keep getting a little bit bigger, and this is probably the biggest WRX or Impreza chassis
Mhm.
that you was had. Like,
Ever.
yeah, you go into a GD and you put a car seat into a GD, and it is packed.
Tight.
Right? Like
It's
you know,
tight.
But
Little.
this new car, like, it is spacious. So because the Corolla is basically on the Yaris chassis and it's just stretched, it might be size wise, like if you like you put one of these new WRXs next to like even like a 14, and it looks like the 2022 WRX 8, two of those WRXs, because
Yeah.
it is much bigger. But like I bet you that the Corolla side by side would be more along the lines of like the GD chassis car.
Right.
So like it's a wagon, but maybe the usable space is not the same.
Yeah. Like, I mean, especially with, when your kiddo's getting longer,
Yeah.
they end up getting long legs and like kicks in the back of the head. It's like, oh, stop kicking this seat.
Yeah.
So there's more room in the bigger car.
Sure.
So that's probably part of why that sways me back to, keeping with like the WRX would be.
So I think for me, the decision, like we were talking about earlier, comes down to two different things. Like if I'm talking about real world daily driver application, I probably would pick the WRX because A, they're readily available. B, you can pick options for them and you're going to be able to get the car with the options that you want.
Yeah.
And C, it's just a great baseline. Whereas if I'm looking for a track car that I could wait a while for, I'm not necessarily trying to drive it every day, I could probably wait for the Corolla. And the cool thing is, if you pick the lower price point on the Corolla, there's already factory options for upgrades. I mean,
Right.
you can look to all of the Morizo parts, the Circuit Edition parts for your core GR, and I mean, there's a lot of potential there if you have time and money to wait for all of these parts
Yeah.
to be available.
I think ultimately, like real world, it's like, is it going to be available, and what's the price going to be? That
Right.
really is what it's going to come down to. And I think ultimately, like, if you drive a WRX, you might be surprised how much you like it. I know I was, and that might be the deciding factor there. It's
Right.
just availability, and actually, like, you might really like the WRX. Yeah. Well, I think that's as good a place to end as any. Hopefully, I don't know. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed the conversation. Thanks very much for watching. Thanks for your support as always. And until next time, stay tuned to Flatiron's Tuning.
Get moved.